Hello, English students. It's Mr. Williamson again, and we are continuing with our myth module by reading this myth story called The Raven and the First Men, the Beginnings of the Haida. So let's do a little read aloud here together. And remember, I am not perfect with some words that we might come across, particularly these myths from other cultures. I may stumble in the pronunciation of some words, particularly names, but like any trooper, I will give it my best shot and just try my best. So let us go in and do this. As you're reading, highlight details to help you make inferences about the lives of the Haida. Use sticky notes to record your inferences. So just don't ignore these introductory little passages here because they help you. They point you in the right direction. Like obviously, right here, as we're reading this, we're focusing on the lives of the Haida. This is probably just based on the title alone. This myth is probably another example of a creation myth, which, as we've discussed in our previous lessons, um, a creation myth is a type of myth that explains how something came into existence or why something is the way it is. And in this case, because it's called the beginnings of the Haida, um, more than likely some myth to explain how I'm assuming these Haida people of Haida have come to an existence, but we shall find out. In the spirit world, the trickster god Raven grew bored. He decided to leave and fly over the earth, but he found it was in total darkness. The selfish sky chief had been hoarding daylight from the world. Raven wanted to be able to see the earth as he flew over it, so he decided to play a trick on the chief and steal the light. Raven crept into the chief's dwelling. He appeared as a baby with raven hair and black eyes. The chief's daughter adopted the child, never knowing that he was, in fact, Raven the trickster. So I'm already, one thing I like to do when I read is make, connections to things I may already know or other stories I may have read or even my own life. And a couple of things, this already reminds me of some other myths, like the whole um, idea that this raven wants to go in and steal light. That reminds me, I don't know if you know the myth of Prometheus, who is a Greek myth, but he stole fire from Olympus to give to man. So it kind of just reminds me of that. And also the whole thing of a trickster. It makes me think of the Norse mythology of Loki. And I'm sure a lot of you Marvel fans out there know who Loki is, but he was a trickster kind of god too. So, anyways, just thinking out loud. But when you read, find relevance, find connections and things. And that's one thing that I thought. So, okay, so let's continue. The daughter loved the child, but soon the baby began to cry. Sky Chief did whatever he could to comfort his new grandson, but the baby was inconsolable. Finally, to appease the child, he gave him a small box to play with. Raven, as the baby, tumbled and tossed the box until it fell open. Whoosh! The stars flew up through the smoke hole in the ceiling, settling in the night sky. So we see some words here: inconsolable, appease. I mispronounced it the first time I said it. I apologize. Inconsolable. So the baby was inconsolable. What could that possibly mean? If you think about it, you could probably figure it out on your own using the context. But if you can't, click on it. Inconsolable, unable to be comforted. So the baby was not able to be comforted until the only way to appease the child, he gave him a small box. Appease, appease. So I think we may have seen that word before, but if you don't know, it means to soothe or quiet down. So don't ignore these things as you're reading, especially if you don't know the words. All right, so the baby got the box to play with, and Raven is the baby, and he tumbled the box until it fell open, and stars flew into the sky. Okay, so it's probably explaining this origin of stars here. The chief was very upset, but was able to recover, as they were only stars and not very luminous. But in no time the baby grew bored again and shrieked violently. Finally, the chief gave the child another box to entertain him. Raven, disguised as the baby, began to play even more wildly with the second box. He tumbled it hard, and again it fell open. The moon spilled from the box, and in excitement, the child tossed it high into the sky. He tried to catch the moon before it escaped, but it was too late. He resolved not to let the child have anything else to play with. Instead, he decided his daughter would just have to give the child to another woman. But the daughter refused. She had grown to love the baby despite his irritable behavior. Once again, the child became bored and wailed profusely, his black eyes flashing mischievously like a raven's. The chief did everything he could think of to calm the child. Nevertheless, the baby cried on and pointed at a third box in the corner. Before the chief could move, his daughter handed the child this new toy to play with. This time, knowing the treasure that lay inside, the child turned back into Raven, who snatched the box in his beak and flew up through the smoke hole in the ceiling. Once away from the Sky Chief, Raven released the sun from its confinement. Light shone across the entire earth, illuminating mountains, rivers, and oceans. Raven no longer had to fly through the dark. There's a little audio thing here. Um, let's click it. I'm not sure if in this recording you can hear the audio, but we'll find out. Okay, I'm not sure if my recording device captured that, but it just points out that the raven was able to get what he wanted. He wanted the sun, but he got it through trickery. He didn't get it through arguing or debating with the chief. He used his trickster skills to get the sun. All right. So what happens next? But in Raven's travels, he saw that there was no one to take care of the earth. He landed on a beach and stopped to think about how to solve the problem. Then he saw a huge clamshell. It seemed to be making noise. Curious, Raven approached and saw a group of tiny creatures in the shell. When they saw Raven, they huddled together and tried to hide. Raven opened his beak and sang a beautiful song, calming the creatures in the shell. Then, using his powerful talons, he opened the shell and released the first human beings. That explains the sculpture that was at the beginning of the story. So once again, like many creation myths, this myth is addressing the question of how did humans come into existence. The men were hungry and thirsty, but there was no food on the large sandy beach, and the salt water just made them thirstier. Determined to take care of the men he had found, Raven flew to find them provisions. When he returned, he gave them almost everything they would ever need. Still, Raven could tell that men were not truly happy. They did not have companions to join them in caring for the earth. So Raven, wise and determined, searched the earth and sea until he found a group of women trapped inside a chitin, or chitin. I'm not sure what that is. I have to claim my ignorance, but it's highlighted. There's a link there. Don't ignore that. Okay, it's okay not to know something. It's good to learn something. So let's click on this because I actually don't know what this is. I'm not even sure how it's pronounced. I'm going to say a chitin. A chitin is a mollusk, like a clam or oyster. Notice how the men were inside a clam shell and the women were inside a similar creature shell. Okay, so it's another kind of sea crustacean, like a clam or an oyster. He brought them to the men. The two groups of humans fit well together, and Raven became very protective of his people. Though he still played a trick every now and then, Raven always cared and provided for them. Ever since, Raven has been the mediator between the human world and the spirit world, between life and what comes after. All right. So it's a very short myth, but it's it's obviously an example of a creation myth because it explains several things in there. But the big one is about, seems like based on the title, how these particular groups of people um, came into existence, the Haida. But it also addresses like how did the moon get in the sky, and how did the stars get in the sky, how did the sun get in the sky. Don't ignore the questions embedded within here. Where did Raven find the first humans? Obviously, I'm not going to answer it for you, but you will when you read the story on your own. And yeah, that was a short myth, but it served its purpose. It uses the supernatural, in this case, gods, goddesses, and even like personified animals to explain something in the natural world. So I enjoyed that. It was not a difficult read, not too many challenging, um, words in that case. There were some that were maybe a little tough, but be sure that if you come across a word that you don't know in any of our readings, um, to if there is not a link to look up the word directly, like for instance, luminous, that you take the time to look it up yourself if you cannot figure out the word's meaning in context. All right. Well, hope you enjoyed that. And the next video will be the other myth story that goes with this. Well, that's not goes with it, but we're doing a comparison. So when we read our next myth, we're going to be comparing this myth with the other one. Take care. Talk to you soon.